There comes a moment in every person's life when they realize that the opinions of others have been quietly stealing their destiny. It doesn't happen all at once. It begins the day you stop doing what feels right just because someone asked, "Why?" and you felt the need to explain yourself. From that moment on, your power begins to fade. But when you stop explaining yourself, when you reclaim your own mind, you unlock a kind of freedom that few people ever experience. This is the story of one man who discovered that truth and how it changed everything. Part 1. The Awakening. The autumn wind swept through the streets of Chicago as Daniel Harris, a 34-year-old marketing executive, sat in his car staring at the faint reflection of his own face in the windshield. He had just left another exhausting meeting where he spent more time defending his ideas than actually discussing them. Every time he spoke, someone interrupted with questions like, "Are you sure this is the right approach?" Or, "Have you considered what management will think?" He had considered all of it, again and again. But somehow, his confidence was always followed by an explanation. That night, Daniel didn't drive home right away. He pulled over near the lake, stepped out into the cold air, and stared at the skyline. The city lights shimmered like silent witnesses to his frustration. In that stillness, a quiet voice in his mind whispered, "Why are you always explaining yourself?" It wasn't the first time he'd heard that voice. For years he had brushed it off, convincing himself that explaining was part of being polite, professional, or reasonable. But now, standing there with the wind biting his skin, he realized that voice was not doubt, it was truth. Daniel's thoughts drifted back to childhood. He remembered the day he told his teacher he wanted to be an inventor. Her response came with a kind smile and a raised eyebrow. "Why don't you try something more realistic, Daniel?" He remembered his parents' worried looks when he said he wanted to start his own company instead of taking a safe job after college. "Are you sure that's wise?" his father asked. So he explained. He explained for years. Every dream, every decision, every choice, always accompanied by long, careful justifications designed to make others understand. But they never really did. The truth was, Daniel had spent most of his life chasing approval he didn't need. That night by the lake, something inside him snapped, not in anger, but in clarity. He realized he had been living his life as if he were on trial, presenting evidence for every dream he dared to pursue. And the jury? People whose opinions didn't truly matter. When he got home, Daniel sat at his desk and opened the worn copy of Think and Grow Rich that had been sitting untouched for years. He had read it once in college but hadn't been ready to understand it back then. He flipped through the pages until one sentence seemed to leap out at him. "Opinions are the cheapest commodities on earth. Everyone has a flock of opinions ready to be wished upon anyone who will accept them." He read it 3 times. Then he whispered to himself, "That's it. That's what I've been doing. Accepting everyone else's opinions, and paying with my peace of mind." Napoleon Hill's words struck something deep within him. For the first time, Daniel saw that his habit of explaining was not courtesy, it was submission. Every explanation was a way of saying, "I need your approval before I can move forward." He had been giving away his power for years. The next morning, Daniel woke with a strange sense of calm. He didn't rush to check emails or scroll through social media. Instead, he made a cup of coffee, sat by the window, and wrote in his notebook, "From today, I owe no one an explanation for my dreams." That sentence felt like a declaration of independence. He went to work with new energy. In the same office where he used to shrink from criticism, he now stood firm. When a colleague questioned his idea for a new campaign, Daniel smiled and said simply, "I believe this is the right direction. Let's move forward." No long justification. No nervous laughter. Just quiet certainty. Something remarkable happened. People listened. They didn't interrupt. They didn't press for long explanations. They simply nodded. Authority, he realized, wasn't granted, it was sensed. And people could sense when a man believed in his own words. That evening, Daniel met his mentor, an older businessman named Mr. Rowland, who had built a fortune in real estate. They often met for coffee, but this time Daniel came with questions burning in his mind. "Why is it that when I stop explaining myself, people start respecting me more?" he asked. Rowland chuckled. "Because you stopped begging for approval," he said. "Most people don't even realize they're doing it. They think they're being considerate or logical. But deep down, they're afraid of disapproval. And fear is something others can sense instantly. Daniel leaned forward. So you're saying I've been teaching people to doubt me? Roland nodded. Exactly. Every time you defend your choice, you tell the world you're not sure about it yourself. But when you state your decision with quiet confidence, you teach them how to treat you. You teach them that your judgment has value. Daniel sat back, letting the words sink in. He felt as though the fog that had clouded his mind for years was finally lifting. Roland continued. Hill taught that success begins with definite purpose. You can't have purpose if you're always explaining it away. The moment you stop explaining, you step into authority, your own authority. That night, Daniel began to reflect on all the moments he had surrendered his power through over-explaining. The job interviews where he talked too much, trying to sound convincing. The relationships where he justified his choices just to keep peace. The countless hours wasted trying to make people understand dreams they were never meant to understand. He realized that for every explanation he gave, he lost a little more time, a little more energy, a little more faith in himself. He smiled sadly and whispered, "No more." The next day, something inside Daniel shifted permanently. His coworkers noticed it. His voice carried weight. His decisions seemed sharper. And even though he said less, his words meant more. Confidence, he realized, wasn't loud, it was silent and certain. In the coming weeks, Daniel would face bigger tests of this new philosophy. Friends would question his choices, colleagues would challenge his vision, and doubt would try to sneak back in. But for the first time, he wouldn't explain. He would simply decide, and in that silence, his real power would begin to grow. To be continued in Part 2. Breaking the habit of approval. Would you like me to continue with Part 2, same Napoleon Hill inspired story style, 1,000 words, simple and powerful for American readers? Title: The Power of Silent Confidence. Part 2, Breaking the Habit of Approval, inspired by Napoleon Hill's principles, story style, 1,000 words, hook. Most people never realize how much energy they waste trying to be understood. They explain, justify, and defend every move, hoping others will approve. But here's a truth that successful people know deep in their bones. The more you explain yourself, the less power you hold. Real power moves in silence. It doesn't beg for permission, it creates results. This is where Daniel Harris finally began to understand that lesson, and it changed the entire course of his life. Part 2, Breaking the Habit of Approval. The following weeks after Daniel's talk with Mr. Roland were unlike anything he had ever experienced. He noticed small shifts, quiet but powerful ones. He no longer rushed to defend his decisions in meetings. When someone raised an eyebrow or asked, "Why are we doing it this way?" he simply smiled and said, "Because it works." That simple statement carried a calm certainty that silenced the room more effectively than any long explanation ever had. People started trusting his judgment, not because he convinced them, but because he stopped trying to. But Daniel also discovered something else. Silence made some people uncomfortable. Coworkers who were used to his polite explanations didn't know how to handle this new version of him. Some thought he'd become arrogant. Others whispered that he'd changed. They were right. He had changed. He was no longer chasing their approval. He had decided to trust his own mind. One evening, Daniel met Mr. Roland again for dinner at a quiet restaurant downtown. The old man listened carefully as Daniel described the transformation he was experiencing. "I feel lighter," Daniel said, stirring his coffee. "Like I'd been carrying a backpack full of rocks and suddenly dropped it." Roland nodded. "That's the weight of explanation," he said. "It's heavier than people realize. Every time you explain yourself to someone who doesn't understand your vision, you hand them one of those rocks." Daniel leaned back. "I guess I've handed out a mountain." Roland chuckled. "We all have. But here's what you're learning. Your energy is your greatest currency. And how you spend it determines everything." Daniel frowned. "You mean like time?" "Exactly," Roland said. "When you use your energy to justify yourself, you're spending it on something that gives you no return. It's like putting your money into a hole and hoping it grows. But when you use that same energy to create, to act, to move forward, you multiply it." Those words echoed in Daniel's mind long after dinner. That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat by his window, looking out at the glowing city skyline, and thought about how much of his life he had wasted explaining instead of doing. He thought of every dream that had died while waiting for someone's approval. The next morning, Daniel arrived at the office early. He looked around at the gray cubicles, the endless chatter, the constant checking of opinions. Everyone seemed busy, but few seemed truly alive. He thought about how Napoleon Hill once said, "Energy is the currency of achievement." He understood it now. Every word he spoke in defense of his dream had drained that currency. Every explanation was like paying interest on someone else's approval. He opened his notebook and wrote at the top of a new page, "Invest energy in creation, not explanation." It became his new rule. That week, Daniel was assigned a challenging project, a national campaign for a major client. His team was nervous. The concept he proposed was bold and unconventional. When he presented it, the room grew tense. One colleague, Jason, spoke up. "I don't think this will work. The client's going to want something safer." In the past, Daniel would have tried to defend his idea with charts and reasoning. But now, he simply looked Jason in the eye and said, "I respect your opinion. Let's see what happens when we execute it." The silence that followed was uncomfortable, but powerful. Daniel felt something stir deep inside him, a new kind of strength. He realized that silence wasn't weakness. It was authority. It said, "I believe in this enough to prove it through action." And that's exactly what he did. Over the next few weeks, he poured his focus into executing the campaign. He worked early mornings, stayed late nights, and trusted his instincts completely. The project launched, and within days, the client's response exceeded all expectations. They loved it. Even the same people who doubted him now praised his vision. But Daniel knew the truth. The only thing that had really changed was his energy. He had stopped explaining and started creating. One night after the campaign's success, Daniel sat in his living room, reading about the lives of great inventors and entrepreneurs. Thomas Edison, who kept going after thousands of failed experiments. Henry Ford, who was mocked for believing every family could own a car. The Wright brothers, who risked everything for flight when everyone called them fools. Not one of them wasted time explaining themselves to those who couldn't see the vision. They didn't convince, they created. Daniel closed the book and smiled. "That's it," he whispered. "They didn't try to describe color to the blind. They showed it through light." He realized something profound. Every minute spent defending your dream is a minute stolen from building it. Every word of explanation weakens your energy. The people who change the world don't seek understanding first. They create proof through results. Weeks later, Daniel met Mr. Rowland again. "You've changed," Rowland said, studying him. "Your energy is different." Daniel nodded. "I stopped spending it on the wrong things." Rowland smiled. "Good. You're beginning to understand one of Hill's most powerful principles. Control your mind and your energy, and you'll control your destiny." Daniel sat back and said, "It's strange. I thought people would think I was rude or distant. But now they actually respect me more." Rowland nodded. "That's the irony. When you stop asking for approval, the world gives it to you freely. Not because they finally understand you, but because they can feel your certainty." As Daniel walked home that night, the city lights seemed different, brighter somehow. He thought about how many people spend their lives trying to explain themselves into acceptance, never realizing that true acceptance begins within. The more he thought about it, the clearer it became. Success was not about convincing others to believe in you. It was about believing in yourself enough to act, even when others don't. That realization became his foundation, the unshakable truth that would guide every decision from that day forward. He knew the journey was just beginning, but he felt ready for whatever came next. Because for the first time in his life, Daniel Harris no longer needed anyone's approval to move forward. He had learned the secret Napoleon Hill spoke of. A man becomes unstoppable the moment he stops explaining himself. To be continued in Part 3. The Quiet Shift of Power. Would you like me to continue with Part 3 in the same storytelling style? 1,000 words, easy, motivational, and inspired by Napoleon Hill? There comes a moment in every person's life when they realize they have spent too much time asking for permission to be who they already are. It is the moment when you look in the mirror and see not the person you could become, but the one who has been waiting patiently inside you, unapologetic, confident, and free. That is the day your transformation begins. Part 3. The power you give away. When Jonathan Barnes walked into his new office for the first time, he felt the old familiar tension rise in his chest. The company had promoted him to regional manager after 7 years of loyal service, and on the surface, it was everything he had wanted. But deep inside, Jonathan carried a quiet fear that had followed him his entire life. The fear of disappointing others. He had always been the one who double-checked every decision, who explained himself to anyone who raised an eyebrow, and who spent sleepless nights wondering if people approved of what he said or did. It was a habit that had begun in childhood. His father was a strict man who demanded explanations for every action. By the time Jonathan was 10, he had learned to justify every move before making it. That pattern had followed him into adulthood, turning into a silent chain that limited his potential. Now, standing in his corner office with a view of the city, he should have felt proud. Instead, he felt exposed. Every choice he made seemed to require approval, from his team, his boss, even his friends. He found himself explaining his decisions over and over until he was exhausted. One night, after another long day of justifying a new strategy to skeptical coworkers, Jonathan sat alone in his office and said aloud, "Why do I keep doing this? Why do I keep asking for permission to lead?" It was a simple question, but it cut straight to the heart of his struggle. That night, he opened a worn book that had been sitting on his shelf for years, Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. He remembered buying it in college but never reading past the first chapter. Now, with nothing left to lose, he began to read. Hill's words seemed to speak directly to him. "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." Jonathan paused, stunned. The truth hit him like a spark. He had been giving away his power by constantly seeking validation. The next morning, he made a silent promise to himself. "From this day forward, I will stop explaining myself." At first, it felt unnatural. In meetings, when a colleague questioned his choices, his old habit urged him to justify everything. But instead, he simply said, "I've considered the options and made my decision." Then he moved on. The room fell quiet. Some people frowned. Others nodded. But something incredible happened. Nobody demanded further explanation. His calm certainty spoke louder than words. That day, Jonathan realized that confidence is not about having all the answers. It is about trusting yourself enough to act without begging for approval. He began to notice how much time he had wasted explaining himself in the past. Every justification had drained his focus. Every need for approval had scattered his energy. Now, that same energy began to fuel his progress. He became more decisive, more creative, and far more respected. His team sensed the shift. They stopped questioning every decision because they could feel his quiet authority. This new behavior confused some people, especially those who had once enjoyed influencing his choices. One coworker named Greg, who had always challenged Jonathan's ideas, confronted him during lunch. "You've changed," Greg said. "You don't explain yourself anymore." Jonathan smiled. "I realized I don't have to." Greg frowned. "But people might think you're arrogant." Jonathan leaned forward and replied, "Confidence and arrogance are not the same. Confidence is knowing my own mind. Arrogance is believing no one else matters. I'm done apologizing for knowing my own direction." That simple statement became a turning point. From then on, Jonathan began teaching his team about self-trust. He encouraged them to think, decide, and act without waiting for his approval. Productivity soared. People began taking ownership of their roles. Months later, during a leadership retreat, the company's CEO pulled Jonathan aside. "I've noticed something," she said. "Your department has become one of the most efficient in the company. What changed?" Jonathan thought for a moment before replying. "I stopped explaining myself, and I taught my team to do the same." The CEO smiled. "That's leadership. Most people waste their energy seeking permission to do what they already know is right." From that moment, Jonathan understood something profound. The habit of explaining yourself too much is not humility, it is fear. It is the fear of being wrong, of being rejected, or of being seen as different. But greatness never grows in the soil of fear. It grows in the soil of self-belief. He began to share this idea with others, and the results were astonishing. People who had once doubted themselves started standing taller. They spoke more clearly, took more risks, and accomplished goals they once thought impossible. Jonathan realized he had been living with what Napoleon Hill called the habit of defeat. It wasn't that others had held him back, it was that he had trained himself to wait for approval before acting. The moment he broke that habit, life began to respond differently. When you stop explaining yourself, something magical happens. The right people begin to respect you, and the wrong ones quietly drift away. You attract opportunities that match your confidence, and repel situations that drain your strength. Jonathan's story is not unique. Every man or woman who has achieved greatness has had to cross this invisible line, the moment when they stop needing permission to live their truth. By the end of that year, Jonathan had transformed not only his career but his identity. He no longer sought comfort in approval. He found comfort in progress. His self-trust had become unshakable. And perhaps the most powerful lesson he learned was this: the world cannot believe in you until you believe in yourself first. Would you like me to continue with Part 4 in the same story style next? Part 4, The Mirror of Self-Trust. The following months became a test of Jonathan's new resolve. Confidence, he learned, was not something you declared once and kept forever. It had to be rebuilt every day through your thoughts, your choices, and your willingness to stand alone when necessary. One morning, he was driving to the office, listening to a podcast about leadership. The speaker said something that made him smile. People don't follow the most talented leader. They follow the one who believes in himself. That line stayed with him. Belief, he thought, is not about convincing others. It is about convincing yourself that your vision deserves to exist. That day, Jonathan faced his first major challenge since his transformation. His company was launching a new product line, and the board wanted to take a safe approach. Jonathan disagreed. He had studied the data, analyzed the trends, and knew that the safe path would lead to mediocrity. The bold strategy, though riskier, had the potential to multiply profits. As the meeting began, he noticed the tension in the room. The executives wanted reassurance. They wanted someone to tell them their fears were justified. Jonathan could feel the old habit rising inside him, the need to explain, to soften his position, to make everyone comfortable. But then he remembered his promise: never again. When it was his turn to speak, he stood tall and spoke with calm conviction. I understand the risks, he said. But success does not come from comfort. It comes from courage and clarity. We have the information we need. I'm confident this is the right move. Silence filled the room. No lengthy PowerPoint, no emotional defense, no anxious justification, just quiet certainty. For a moment, he thought they would reject his idea. But something unexpected happened. One by one, heads began to nod. The CEO smiled slightly and said, If you believe in it that strongly, Jonathan, let's move forward. As he walked out of the meeting, he felt an unfamiliar sense of peace. He had not needed to win an argument. He had simply expressed truth without seeking permission. It was the kind of leadership Napoleon Hill described as definiteness of purpose. The world, Hill wrote, makes way for the person who knows where they are going. In the weeks that followed, the results spoke for themselves. The bold strategy worked. Sales rose. The company's reputation improved. More importantly, Jonathan discovered something deeper than professional success. He had learned how to trust himself even when others doubted him. That trust became a mirror. Every time he looked at his reflection, he no longer saw the anxious boy who needed approval. He saw a man who made decisions based on reason and vision, not fear. Confidence, he realized, was not about feeling superior to others. It was about becoming the kind of person who does not need to prove anything. One evening, after a long day, he met an old friend named David for coffee. David had known Jonathan since college and remembered how often he used to second-guess himself. You've changed, man, David said. You seem settled. Not arrogant, but sure. Jonathan smiled. I stopped living like a student who needs a teacher's approval. I became the teacher of my own life. David laughed. You sound like one of those motivational guys. Jonathan shook his head. No, it's simpler than that. I realize that most of us explain ourselves because we're afraid of being misunderstood. But I learned that understanding is not a requirement for respect. People may not always get your vision right away, but they will feel your certainty. David nodded slowly. So you're saying confidence is a language? Jonathan grinned. Exactly. It's a language that everyone understands, even when you say nothing. The conversation reminded him of something he had read in Think and Grow Rich. Thoughts mixed with faith become a powerful force. Faith in yourself is the invisible magnet that attracts cooperation, opportunity, and trust. The moment you begin to doubt, the magnet weakens. But when you hold firm, the world aligns around your conviction. Soon after, Jonathan faced another test. His company partnered with a new investor, a sharp and skeptical man named Richard Cole. Richard questioned everything Jonathan did. Why this approach? Why that decision? What makes you so sure? He would ask in meetings. The old Jonathan would have tried to satisfy him with detailed explanations, hoping to win his approval. But the new Jonathan responded differently. He listened respectfully, then said, "Because it's the best decision for the vision we agreed on." At first, Richard was irritated by his short answers. But after a few months, he began to respect Jonathan's confidence. One day, he said privately, "You know, at first I thought you were stubborn. Now I see you're consistent. People trust that." Jonathan replied, "Consistency comes from knowing who you are." Richard nodded. "That's rare in business, and in life." That night, Jonathan reflected on what he had learned. True confidence is silent. It doesn't shout. It doesn't explain. It simply moves forward, and the world adjusts. The energy he once wasted defending his choices was now focused on creating results. That he began to teach his team a principle he called the 3 questions. Whenever someone started over-explaining a decision, he would ask, 1. Who are you trying to convince? 2. Why does their approval matter? 3. Will their opinion change your result? Most of the time, people realized they were explaining only to ease their own insecurity. Jonathan reminded them that clarity of purpose is stronger than any argument. When you are clear, you don't need to convince. The result becomes your explanation point. One day, his assistant Emily came to him worried about a presentation. "I feel like I have to justify every slide," she said. "What if they think I missed something?" Jonathan smiled. "Emily, prepare well, then trust yourself. Remember this, confidence doesn't come from knowing everything. It comes from knowing that whatever happens, you can handle it." Her presentation went perfectly. Later she thanked him and said, "That advice changed everything. I didn't explain. I communicated." Jonathan realized that was the heart of it. Explanation seeks approval. Communication seeks understanding. One weakens you, the other builds connection. As the months passed, his new approach began to shape the company culture. People stopped apologizing for every decision. Meetings became shorter and more productive. There was more trust, less fear. Jonathan could see the ripple effect of one person's transformation spreading through an entire organization. He understood now what Napoleon Hill meant by applied faith. Faith is not blind hope. It is the discipline of acting with certainty when you have done your thinking and made your choice. It is belief expressed through motion. Jonathan's success was no longer luck or timing. It was alignment, his thoughts, beliefs, and actions all moving in the same direction. And as he stood by the window of his office one evening, watching the sun sink over the city, he felt a quiet gratitude. He had learned that the greatest freedom in life is the freedom to trust your own judgment without apology. He whispered to himself. Confidence is not found in others' approval. It's found in the calm of knowing who you are. That was the moment he understood he had not just built a career. He had built himself. Would you like me to continue with part 5 in the same motivational Napoleon Hill story tone? 1,000 words. Part 5. The silent power within. Months passed, and Jonathan's quiet confidence began to reshape more than just his company. It began to transform his entire way of living. Every morning, he rose before sunrise, brewed a strong cup of coffee, and spent a few minutes in stillness. No phone, no messages, no outside noise. Just silence. It was in those moments that he began to understand something Napoleon Hill had written about so often. Your only limitation is the one you set up in your own mind. Jonathan realized that when he had been seeking approval, he had been building invisible walls around his potential. Each explanation to others was another brick in those walls. Now, with every act of self-trust, those walls were falling down. He noticed the change not only in how others treated him but in how he felt about himself. His thoughts had become his greatest allies instead of his worst enemies. The quiet voice of doubt that once questioned every move was replaced by a stronger voice that said, "You've earned the right to decide." One evening, after a particularly successful week, he received an email from a young entrepreneur named Claire. She had seen him speak at a business conference and wanted advice. "Everyone tells me my idea is too risky," she wrote. "I spend so much time explaining why it will work that I never seem to make progress. How do I stop needing everyone's approval?" Jonathan smiled when he read her message because he saw his younger self in her words. He invited her to meet at a small cafe downtown. When she arrived, she looked nervous but determined. "Mr. Barnes," she began, "I know you're busy, but I really need guidance. My startup idea keeps getting shot down. My investors say it's unrealistic, my friends tell me to be practical, and my parents think I'm wasting my time. I just want them to understand." Jonathan nodded patiently. "Claire, let me tell you something important. The moment you stop needing everyone to understand, your success begins. Approval is a slow poison. It keeps you alive just enough to stop you from truly living." She blinked, unsure how to respond. He continued, "When I was your age, I thought confidence came from convincing others I was right. But I learned it comes from proving to yourself that you can act even when no one believes in you." Claire leaned in. "But what if I'm wrong?" Jonathan smiled. "Then you learn. Failure is just education in disguise. The only true mistake is letting fear make your choices for you." He told her the story of how he once explained himself into exhaustion, how it drained his creativity, blurred his vision, and stole his energy. "Every time I defended my dream," he said, "I was giving others the power to define it. Once I stopped explaining, I discovered something incredible. The people who truly mattered stayed with me. The rest faded away." She was quiet for a moment. "So you're saying I should stop trying to convince everyone?" "I'm saying you should convince yourself first," Jonathan replied. "When you have that inner certainty, words become unnecessary. People feel it. Confidence speaks louder than any explanation." That day, Claire left with new fire in her eyes. A few months later, she sent Jonathan another email. Her startup had launched successfully, and she thanked him for one line he had said at the cafe: "You do not need permission to be who you are." Reading her message filled Jonathan with gratitude. He realized that confidence, like a candle, can light many others without losing its own flame. Around that same time, Jonathan was invited to give a talk at a leadership retreat in Colorado. The theme was Mastering the Inner Game of Success. When he arrived, he found himself surrounded by CEOs, executives, and innovators from across the country. Most were brilliant, but many looked tired, drained from the endless effort of explaining, proving, and defending their decisions. When Jonathan stepped on stage, he didn't begin with charts or statistics. He began with a story. "There was once a man," he said, "who spent half his life trying to be understood. Every day, he explained his ideas to those who could not see them, his dreams to those who did not believe in them, and his purpose to those who had none of their own. And every time he explained, a little of his energy faded away. Then one day he stopped. He decided to act instead of explain, to trust instead of defend. From that moment, his success began." He paused, then smiled. "That man was me." The room went silent. People leaned forward. Jonathan continued, speaking from the heart, not from notes. "Your energy is your life's currency. Every time you justify your dreams to people who cannot see them, you are spending that currency on approval instead of achievement. Stop explaining and start executing. Let your results become your explanation." After the session, dozens of attendees came to thank him. One older executive said, "I've been in business for 30 years, but I still explain myself to everyone. You reminded me that leadership is not about being understood, it's about being clear." That night, Jonathan sat alone in his hotel room, reflecting. He realized something profound: confidence is not a performance. It is a state of quiet self-respect. When you respect your own judgment, the world reflects that respect back to you. The next morning, he hiked into the mountains before sunrise. The air was cold, the sky still dark. He reached a clearing and watched the first rays of light touch the snow-covered peaks. In that stillness, he felt a sense of peace that no amount of approval could ever provide. He thought about Napoleon Hill's words. Whatever the mind can conceive and believe, it can achieve. Jonathan finally understood that belief is not built by convincing others. It is built by proving to yourself that you can keep promises to your own soul. As he walked back down the trail, he realized how far he had come. He was no longer the man who needed validation. He was the man who created his own certainty. That night, he wrote in his journal, "The only person who needs to understand your vision is the one who was given that vision, you." That simple truth became his new compass. It guided his actions, his leadership, and his relationships. When employees came to him uncertain, he reminded them that clarity is born in solitude, not in committee. When friends doubted their own abilities, he told them that confidence begins when you stop asking for permission. Jonathan had finally learned what every great achiever learns, that silence and certainty often speak louder than words. The next chapter of his life was waiting, and he was ready to meet it, without hesitation, without explanation, and with the calm strength of a man who had discovered the silent power within. Would you like me to continue with Part 6, the final chapter, complete? With Jonathan's ultimate transformation, his legacy, and a powerful call to action like subscribe, share, and comment at the end, as in your previous stories? Part 6. The master of his fate. The winter snow had melted from the Colorado mountains, and spring had begun to color the valley with new life. Jonathan Barnes stood on the balcony of his home, watching the sunrise. The sky turned gold, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming trees. It was in moments like this that Jonathan reflected on how far he had come. The man who once explained every decision was gone. In his place stood someone new, calm, grounded, and quietly powerful. He thought about the journey. How he had once allowed others' opinions to shape his destiny. How every explanation had stolen a bit of his confidence. But now, his strength came from within, not from approval. He had learned that true confidence is built in silence, not in conversation. One morning, he was invited to speak at a university in Boston. The audience was filled with young students, eager to learn about leadership and success. Jonathan looked at their bright faces and saw reflections of his younger self, full of potential but unsure of direction. He began his talk not with success stories, but with a confession. "When I started my career," he said, "I believed the key to success was convincing others that I was right. I worked hard, but I wasted years trying to explain my dreams to people who could never understand them. Then I learned something that changed my life. The moment you stop explaining yourself to others, you take back control of your destiny." The room fell silent. Every word carried the weight of experience. He continued. "Each of you has a vision inside you. That vision was not given to your parents, your friends, or your teachers. It was given to you. And if you spend your life waiting for others to understand it, you will die waiting. The world does not reward explanation, it rewards execution." After his speech, a young man approached him. He said, "Mr. Barnes, I'm afraid to act because my family thinks my dreams are foolish. How do I stop caring about what they think?" Jonathan smiled gently. "You do not stop caring," he said. "You love them, but you trust yourself more. You must understand that belief is personal. Your dream will make sense to others only after you make it real." That night, back in his hotel room, Jonathan wrote in his journal, "The world respects the doer, not the explainer. Action is the loudest language of belief." His company continued to grow, but that was no longer his greatest achievement. His true success was the peace he felt within. He had stopped living for applause and started living for purpose. Each decision he made came from clarity, not fear. One afternoon, while meeting with his executive team, a new manager questioned one of Jonathan's bold ideas. The room grew tense, waiting for him to justify his choice. But Jonathan simply said, "I have considered the facts, and this is the direction we are taking." The team nodded. They trusted him. His calm certainty was enough. No long explanations, no defensive tone. Just quiet authority. That moment became a lesson to everyone in the room. Leadership is not about convincing, it is about conviction. Months later, Jonathan was invited to join a private retreat of leaders, thinkers, and innovators. The event was held in a quiet mountain lodge. One evening, They gathered around a fireplace to discuss the most important lessons they had learned in life. When it was Jonathan's turn, he said something that stayed with everyone who heard it. The greatest prison is built from the need for approval. The greatest freedom begins the moment you no longer seek it. An older woman in the group nodded and said, "You speak like you've lived it." Jonathan smiled. "I have. And I can tell you this, when you stop explaining, you discover something magical. People begin to treat you differently. They sense your strength. Opportunities come more easily. The world opens doors for those who walk with certainty." As the fire crackled, the group sat in thoughtful silence. Each of them understood the truth behind his words. Success was not only about strategy or timing, it was about mastering one's mind. Years later, when Jonathan retired, he wrote a short book about his experiences. He titled it, "Silent Power: The Art of Leading Without Explanation." It became a quiet bestseller, not because it was loud or trendy, but because it spoke to something eternal. Readers from all walks of life wrote to him, sharing how his ideas helped them reclaim their confidence, pursue their dreams, and stop living for others' approval. In one of the final chapters, he wrote, "True freedom begins when you trust your own vision more than others' opinions. You owe no one an explanation for your purpose. The only person who must understand your path is you." Jonathan's life had come full circle. The boy who once sought approval from everyone had become a man who inspired others to believe in themselves. On his last public appearance, an interviewer asked him, "Mr. Barnes, if you could leave one message to the next generation, what would it be?" He looked thoughtful for a moment, then said, "Listen to your own soul. You already know what to do. The world will try to confuse you, but your inner voice will always tell the truth. When you stop explaining and start acting, the world begins to respect your silence." He paused, then added with a gentle smile, "Remember, your dream is your divine assignment. Protect it, nurture it, and act on it. The rest will fall into place." That evening, as he walked along the quiet beach near his home, the sunset painted the horizon in gold and crimson. The ocean waves rolled in steady rhythm, as if echoing the peace within him. He realized that success was never about wealth or recognition. It was about mastering oneself, the ability to think independently, act decisively, and live authentically. In the distance, he saw a group of children playing by the shore. Their laughter filled the air, free and pure. It reminded him that confidence is our natural state, the one we are born with before the world teaches us to doubt. His life's purpose had been to rediscover that truth and help others do the same. He sat on the sand, watching the waves, and whispered, "Thank you." Not to anyone in particular, but to life itself, for every challenge, every lesson, every moment of growth. As the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, Jonathan knew he had completed his journey. He was at peace, knowing that his greatest legacy was not a company or a book, but a philosophy, the courage to live without explanation. He closed his eyes and smiled, content in the knowledge that he had become, at last, the master of his fate and the captain of his soul. Call to action. If Jonathan's story inspired you, share it with someone who needs to reclaim their confidence and stop living for approval. Subscribe for more powerful, life-changing stories rooted in the timeless wisdom of Napoleon Hill. And leave a comment. Tell us one area of your life where you'll stop explaining and start believing.